Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into one of the most incredible stories in all of history, the absolutely epic fall from grace of Napoleon Bonaparte. How did the master of Europe manage to lose it all in just a couple of years? Well, let's get into it. So, after years and years of fighting, Napoleon had basically beaten everyone on the continent. He was on top of the world. He even struck up this really close and kind of strange friendship with Tsar Alexander of Russia. Seriously, Napoleon was completely charmed by him. But as you can guess, this little bromance was not built to last. You see, even with all of Europe basically under his control, there was one nation that was just a constant thorn in his side: Great Britain. They were safe across the English Channel, protected by their unbeatable navy, and they just kept pouring money into the pockets of Napoleon's enemies. He couldn't beat them in a straight-up fight, and it was driving him crazy. So Napoleon decides to get creative. He thinks, all right, if I can't beat you on the battlefield, I'm gonna beat you in your wallet. And this leads to his grand economic strategy, the continental system. It was a plan designed to bring the British economy to its knees, but instead, it set the stage for his own downfall. The idea was, on paper, pretty straightforward. He was gonna shut down the entire continent to British goods. A complete embargo. No country in Europe was allowed to trade a single thing with the UK. Napoleon figured if he could just strangle their economy, he could force them to the peace table. Now that logic seems simple enough, right? But here's the thing, it was a huge miscalculation. See, by cutting off trade with Britain, Napoleon also cut off his own empire from one of its most important trading partners. So economies all over the continent started to suffer, while Britain, well, they just shrugged and increased trade with the rest of the world. And to try and enforce this failing system, Napoleon had to start getting tough. When Portugal decided they weren't going to play along, he invaded. Then he got paranoid about Spain's loyalty, so he invaded them too. And that kicked off this absolutely brutal guerrilla war, a conflict that became a total quagmire, draining his empire of men and money for years. But the real tipping point, the biggest domino to fall, was Russia. His old pal Tsar Alexander finally had to pull out of the continental system because it was just destroying the Russian economy. Napoleon took this as a deep personal betrayal and a massive threat to his power. He decided he had to make an example of Russia, and it was a fatal mistake. And when I say he decided to make an example of them, I mean he went all in. He put together the Grande Armée, the largest European army in history up to that point. He pulled soldiers from every single corner of his empire for what he thought would be a quick, crushing invasion. Just look at that number, over 600,000 men. It's almost impossible to imagine, but the Russians, they had a simple and utterly devastating plan. They just wouldn't fight. They kept retreating, deeper and deeper into the vast Russian interior, and as they went, they burned everything behind them. This scorched earth tactic meant Napoleon's gigantic army had no food, no supplies, nothing to live on. And the whole campaign was just a complete nightmare from start to finish. On the way in, his army was getting destroyed by summer heat and starvation. They finally get a big battle at Borodino. It's a bloodbath. And they capture Moscow only to find the city in flames. Then they have to turn back, right as the legendary Russian winter sets in. It was a catastrophe of biblical proportions. The final tally is just staggering. Of that huge army of over 600,000 men, fewer than 100,000 even made it out of Russia alive. Napoleon's invincible army was gone. It wasn't destroyed in one great battle, but by hunger, exhaustion, and the sheer brutal cold. So, with his main army completely wiped out, Napoleon was vulnerable for the first time in over a decade. And all across Europe, his enemies could smell blood in the water. They saw their chance, their one big shot to finally throw off his rule. And just like that, the old gang was back together. Nations like Prussia and Austria, who had been forced into alliances with France, immediately turned on him. They joined up with Russia, Sweden, and of course, Great Britain, to form what's known as the Sixth Coalition. And this time, they all had just one thing on their minds: taking down Napoleon for good. But they'd learned from years of getting crushed by him. They knew that fighting Napoleon himself head-on was a bad idea, so they came up with a new playbook, and it was pretty brilliant. The plan was avoid Napoleon at all costs, but wherever his commanders, his marshals were, they would attack, picking his new army apart piece by piece. And this new strategy led to the Battle of Leipzig, or the Battle of the Nations. It was the biggest battle Europe had ever seen. For 4 straight days, these massive armies just smashed into each other. But Napoleon was hopelessly outnumbered. And to make things worse, his German allies literally switched sides in the middle of the fight. It was a complete and total disaster for him. After Leipzig, everything fell apart really fast. The Allied armies poured into France, and in 1814, they captured Paris. Napoleon, being Napoleon, wanted to keep fighting. But his own marshals, his top generals, they'd had enough. They basically told him it was over and forced him to abdicate the throne. As a punishment, the Allies exiled him to be the emperor of this tiny little island called Elba. But if you think that's the end of the story, you really don't know Napoleon. The man who once ruled a continent was not going to be happy ruling a tiny island. He got bored, and that boredom was about to lead to one of the most incredible comebacks in history. Yeah, after less than a year in exile, he just escaped. He sailed back to France with about 1,000 soldiers and started marching to Paris. The new king sent troops to arrest him, but when those soldiers saw their old emperor, they just broke down in tears and started cheering for him. The king fled, and just like that, Napoleon was back in charge. You can just imagine the sheer panic in Europe. The Allies immediately declared war, not on France, but on Napoleon personally. And that set the stage for one final legendary showdown in Belgium. Napoleon's plan was his classic move: divide and conquer. He wanted to hit the British and Prussian armies separately before they could link up. The Allied plan was simpler. The British, led by the Duke of Wellington, just had to hold on for dear life until the Prussians could arrive. The Battle of Waterloo was an incredibly close fight. For hours, the fate of Europe literally hung in the balance. It really looked like Napoleon might pull it off, but then, just in the nick of time, the Prussian army showed up and slammed into the French flank. His army shattered, and his final desperate gamble had failed. This time, the British weren't taking any chances. No more cushy island exiles. They sent him to St. Helena, a tiny remote volcanic rock in the middle of the South Atlantic. It's one of the most isolated places on the entire planet. And it was there, under constant guard, that the man who reshaped a continent would live out the rest of his life. But on St. Helena, Napoleon fought one last battle, the battle for his own legacy. He wrote his memoirs, carefully crafting this image of himself as a revolutionary hero. And you know what? He pretty much won that fight. His legal code is still the basis for law in tons of countries. His military strategies are still taught today. And ironically, his conquests help spark the rise of nationalism that defines modern Europe. And that really brings us to the big question that people still argue about today. Was Napoleon this great liberator who spread the ideals of equality and revolution across Europe? Or was he just a brilliant, power-hungry tyrant who used those ideals for his own personal glory? The man and his legacy remain as complicated as ever.